A gentle steam rises from a kettle as it comes to a boil. This is the sound of a journey beginning, a quiet invitation to travel back through centuries. The story we are about to share is not simply about a drink. It is the hidden history of the ancient tea trade, a vast and shadowy network that connected worlds. This was a realm of camel caravans vanishing into desert sands, of secret mountain passes guarded by empires, and of fortunes built on the humble leaf in your cup. By the end, you will understand how this simple beverage quietly shaped the course of human history, sparking cultural revolutions and toppling kingdoms. We will uncover how a medicinal herb became a form of money, and why spies once risked their lives to steal its secrets. What forgotten value do you think is steeped in your everyday rituals? Long before it filled caravans, tea was a secret whispered by the earth. The story of its discovery is a legend wrapped in mist, set deep in the mountains of ancient China. It begins with a mythical emperor named Shen Nong, a ruler said to have lived around 2,737 years before the Common Era. He was known as the Divine Farmer, a sage who tasted hundreds of herbs to understand their properties, seeking cures for his people. One day, as he rested beneath a wild tree, a few dried leaves drifted down from its branches and landed in the pot of water he had just brought to a boil. Intrigued by the delicate aroma that began to rise, he took a sip. The emperor found the infusion refreshing and revitalizing, and according to the tale, he felt a wave of clarity wash over him. He had just discovered the world's first cup of tea. This beautiful myth, of course, is a story crafted by time, but it perfectly captures the spirit of tea's earliest role, not as a trade good, but as a sacred medicinal herb. For centuries after that legendary sip, tea remained a closely guarded treasure of the elite, a tonic for monks and nobility. It was brewed from fresh leaves, sometimes mixed with ginger or onion, and valued for its supposed ability to aid concentration during long meditation or to soothe various ailments. The real, physical evidence of this ancient relationship was uncovered much later in a tomb from the Han Dynasty. Archaeologists found charred tea leaves buried with a nobleman, placed there for his journey into the afterlife. This was not a casual drink, it was a precious offering. So for over 1,000 years, tea was a ritual, a medicine, and a spiritual aid, its leaves confined to palace gardens and temple grounds. It had not yet learned to travel, but a simple change in how people prepared it would unlock its destiny, setting the leaf on a path that would eventually cross deserts and oceans. The leaf's transformation from a spiritual tonic to a commodity of empire began with a single, dedicated man. During the golden age of the Tang Dynasty, a monk named Lu Yu spent decades studying every aspect of tea. He traveled to plantations, observed methods of roasting and brewing, and compiled his life's work into a single volume titled The Classic of Tea. This was not just a simple guide, it was the world's first complete encyclopedia on the subject, a sacred text for tea drinkers. Lu Yu codified everything from the ideal soil for cultivation to the 24 steps for preparing the perfect cup. He wrote of the spiritual harmony found in the ritual, elevating tea from a mere beverage to a philosophy, a cornerstone of cultured life. His work ignited a nationwide passion, making tea drinking an essential practice for everyone from poets to officials. But to spread this culture beyond the monasteries and salons, tea needed to become something more practical, something that could survive a journey. The ingenious solution was the tea brick. Producers began steaming, pounding, and compressing tea leaves into solid, dense blocks, often stamped with the maker's seal. These bricks were remarkably durable, resistant to weather, and easy to stack and transport. A single brick could be broken apart, with pieces shaved off to brew a pot, or used whole as something far more valuable than a drink. This portability unlocked tea's economic potential, turning it into a form of currency. Now, imagine a caravan setting out from the lush tea gardens of Sichuan. its pack animals laden not with coins but with these fragrant, compact bricks. Its destination was the high, windswept plateau of Tibet. The Tibetan people, living on a diet rich in meat and dairy, craved tea for its digestive properties and the vital warmth it provided against the cold. They had something the Tang Empire desperately needed: strong, hardy warhorses for their cavalry. And so a silent, monumental trade was born, the tea horse trade. At frontier trading posts, officials would carefully evaluate the quality of a tea brick, then barter it for a number of Tibetan ponies. This was not casual commerce, it was a state-managed system, a strategic exchange that fortified an empire's borders while quenching a nation's thirst. The humble tea brick had become a building block of diplomacy and power, setting the stage for a network that would soon grow far more vast and perilous. While tea bricks were solidifying alliances on the Tibetan plateau, another, even more ambitious network was forming far to the west. This was the legendary Silk Road, and it was about to gain a leafy cousin. As the fame of Chinese tea spread, merchants realized these durable bricks were the perfect companion for the long, grueling journey to Central Asia. They began loading them onto the backs of two humped Bactrian camels, alongside bolts of silk and other precious goods, setting out on a route that was less a road and more a trail of survival. The caravan's first great adversary was the Taklamakan Desert, a vast sea of shifting sand whose name in the local language ominously translates to "place of no return." Here, the air itself was a threat, a dry, scorching wind that could suck the moisture from a man's body in hours. For the tea, this was a double-edged sword. The arid climate helped prevent mold, but the fine, abrasive sand was a constant enemy, threatening to infiltrate and ruin the cargo. So how did they protect it? The bricks were wrapped in multiple layers of oiled cloth and animal skins, then packed tightly into woven baskets that were themselves sealed with wax or tar. This created a cocoon, a portable microclimate that shielded the precious leaves from both dust and the rare, devastating desert rain. The journey was a calculated gamble against nature and men. After surviving the desert, the caravans faced the towering ramparts of the Tian Shan, the Celestial Mountains. They navigated high, icy passes where the air grew thin, following paths carved by generations of traders. This was where bandits posed a constant danger, lying in wait for these slow-moving trains of wealth. Protection was not guaranteed by any single army, but by the sheer scale and organization of the caravans themselves. They traveled in massive groups, sometimes with hundreds of camels and guards hired from local tribes, making them a formidable target. Their safety also depended on the oasis towns, the vital lifelines of the Silk Road. At places like Dunhuang, a frontier garrison town famed for its Buddhist cave temples, caravans would stop to rest, resupply, and trade. Here, a tea brick from Sichuan might be bartered for fresh horses, dates, or glassware from the west. Further along, in fabled cities like Samarkand, these tea bricks found an eager new audience. In the bustling bazaars under turquoise domes, Persian and Sogdian merchants sampled the curious compressed leaves, recognizing not just a drink, but a new commodity of immense value. They became the middlemen, the connectors who would funnel tea further into the heart of Persia and beyond. Each oasis was a nerve center, transforming the linear route into a vibrant, interconnected web of commerce and culture. The tea was no longer just traveling, it was being absorbed, creating a thirst in new lands that would one day pull the trade routes into a global frenzy. The high-altitude winds of the Tibetan plateau carried more than just cold, they carried a deep and enduring craving. Here, in one of the world's most extreme environments, tea was not a luxury, it was a biological necessity. The traditional Tibetan diet, rich in yak butter, meat, and barley, provided the dense calories needed to survive the brutal cold, but it was difficult to digest. Tea, especially the dark, fermented bricks traded from Sichuan and Yunnan, became the perfect antidote. It was boiled for hours into a strong, salty brew, often churned with butter and salt to create butter tea, a staple that greased the wheels of daily life. This beverage did more than warm the body. It provided essential vitamins and aided digestion, becoming as fundamental to survival as the barley harvest. This absolute dependence created a powerful geopolitical lever. Chinese dynasties from the Tang to the Ming understood this perfectly. They established highly specialized border tea markets at strategic mountain passes, places like Taozhou and Dajunlu. These were not free markets in any modern sense. They were state-controlled exchange points, meticulously regulated fortresses of trade. Officials would grade the incoming tea bricks, assigning them a strict value measured in horses. A top-grade brick might fetch a strong warhorse, while lower-quality tea traded for pack animals. The system was designed with one clear goal: to ensure the Chinese imperial army had a steady supply of the tough, agile Tibetan ponies that were superior to most breeds found in the lowlands. Controlling the tea meant controlling the flow of these essential military assets, but the intrigue went deeper than horses. The Tibetan plateau was a vast, decentralized region of powerful monasteries and nomadic tribes, difficult to conquer by force. By monopolizing the supply of tea, Chinese authorities found a subtler, more effective form of control. They could reward friendly chieftains with generous tea allotments or punish rebellious ones with a devastating trade embargo. A sudden halt in the tea caravans was not merely an economic sanction. It was a slow, grinding pressure on the health and morale of an entire community. Thus, the humble tea brick became a tool of statecraft, a diplomatic currency that maintained a fragile peace along a volatile frontier for centuries. The caravans that snaked through the Himalayan passes were carrying more than cargo. They were bearing the delicate balance of power itself, steeped in every leaf. And as this system stabilized one border, it created a commodity so valuable that others would stop at nothing to steal its source. The quiet power of the tea brick had secured an empire's borders, but within China's heart, a cultural revolution was brewing. The Song dynasty ushered in an era of breathtaking artistic refinement, transforming tea from a strategic commodity into a high art form. The coarse, utilitarian brick was set aside by the elite in favor of a delicate, powdered tea known as matcha. This vibrant green powder, made from shade-grown leaves that were steamed, dried, and stone-ground, became the centerpiece of an intricate ritual. At lavish social gatherings known as tea contests, scholars and nobles would gather to evaluate the quality of different teas. They would whisk the powder with hot water in exquisite bowls, then judge the resulting brew on the color of its froth, the persistence of its aroma, and the subtlety of its taste. This was not mere drinking, it was a sensory competition, a display of connoisseurship and wealth. The ceramics created for this purpose became masterpieces in their own right. Kilns produced specialized tea bowls, most famously the dark Jianware, with its lustrous black glaze that provided a perfect visual contrast to the vivid green tea froth. These bowls were treasured, collected, and even given poetic names, each one considered a unique work of art. This aesthetic elevation did something crucial. It exponentially increased tea's cultural and monetary value, making it a symbol of the highest sophistication. Yet, even as tea flourished in courtly salons, it was taking on a profoundly different meaning within the quiet walls of Buddhist monasteries. Chan monks, who would later be known in Japan as Zen, adopted tea as a sacred aid to meditation. They valued its ability to foster alertness and calm during long hours of seated practice. For them, the ritual of preparing and drinking tea became a form of moving meditation, a way to cultivate mindfulness and presence in every simple action. These monks became the unsung apostles of tea culture. As they traveled to spread Buddhist teachings to Korea and Japan, they carried with them not just scriptures but tea seeds and the knowledge of cultivation. In their hands, tea transcended its role as a drink or even an art. It became a vehicle for an entire philosophy, a direct path to spiritual clarity. The leaf that had fortified soldiers and bought horses was now enlightening minds, its journey across the sea carrying the quiet essence of a civilization's deepest ideals. The serene philosophy of the tea ceremony would soon face its greatest test, not from within, but from the thunder of hooves on the open steppe. A new force was rising, one that would reshape the continent's trade routes with breathtaking speed and brutal efficiency. The Mongol Empire, forged by Genghis Khan and expanded by his successors, swept across Eurasia like a storm. Their conquests are often remembered for their sheer destructive power, and rightly so. Yet, in the wake of that violence, they established an unprecedented period of stability known as the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. For the first time in centuries, a single authority enforced order along a network of roads stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. The Silk Road, and by extension the tea routes that ran alongside it, were no longer a patchwork of hostile kingdoms and competing tolls. They became a unified, protected highway under the Great Khan's law. The Mongol postal system, the Yam, created a chain of relay stations where riders and caravans could find fresh horses, supplies, and shelter. This infrastructure made journeys more predictable and, while never safe from natural hardship, far less perilous from bandits or arbitrary local rulers. Tea bricks, now traveling alongside Persian silver and European wool, flowed westward with a new consistency. The Mongols themselves, coming from a culture that valued fermented mare's milk, were initially puzzled by the tea habit of their Chinese subjects. But as rulers of a vast, multicultural empire, they quickly recognized its value, both as a taxable commodity and a portable provision for their armies on the move. They adopted and regulated the trade, ensuring its place in the bustling markets of their new capital, Khanbalik, what would become Beijing. It is within this newly connected world that a famous traveler from Venice arrived. Marco Polo spent 17 years in the service of Kublai Khan, and his writings later introduced Europeans to the wonders of the East. He described paper money, coal, and the grandeur of the Khan's court in vivid detail. Yet, curiously, he never explicitly mentions tea. This silence is one of history's enduring little mysteries. Scholars have long debated it. Perhaps he encountered it only as a compressed brick and did not recognize it as the beverage we know. Maybe he drank it in its buttered Tibetan form and found it unremarkable. Or it's possible he simply omitted it because tea was not yet a commodity of interest to his European audience back home. His omission hints that even on these safer, open roads, cultural understanding traveled slower than the goods themselves. The Mongol highways had physically connected the continents, creating a pipeline through which tea could stream. But the real transformation, the moment the West would truly taste and crave the leaf, required more than safe passage. It awaited a collision of empires and the rise of a new kind of merchant, one willing to cross not just mountains but entire oceans. The silence of Marco Polo regarding tea is a telling detail, for while the leaf flowed west along Mongol roads, it was traveling east across a much narrower but equally transformative sea. Buddhist monks had carried tea seeds and the powdered matcha ritual from China to Japan as early as the 9th century, where it remained a precious, secluded practice within monastery walls for centuries. Here, in the quiet gardens of Zen temples, the seed of something entirely new began to sprout. The Japanese encounter with tea was not about acquiring a commodity for trade, but about absorbing a philosophy and then reshaping it into a unique cultural heart. This transformation was guided by masters who saw in the simple act of making tea a path to enlightenment. A former samurai-turned-monk named Murata Juko was among the first to move the ceremony out of the grand reception halls and into a small, humble room. He rejected the ornate Chinese ceramics and lavish displays of wealth that characterized earlier tea gatherings. Instead, Juko sought a different kind of beauty, one rooted in simplicity and inner reflection. He began using locally made, rustic Japanese pottery, finding a profound elegance in their irregular shapes and subtle, natural glazes. This was the early stirring of an aesthetic revolution, one that would find its fullest expression in the concept of wabi-sabi. This is a term deeply difficult to translate, but it encompasses a worldview that finds beauty in imperfection, transience, and the humble authenticity of natural objects. Think of the quiet appreciation for the moss on a stone, the patina on an old wooden bowl, or the way cracked pottery is repaired with gold lacquer, celebrating the breakage as part of the object's history. Wabi-sabi is the beauty of things that are modest, asymmetrical, and intimately tied to the passage of time. It was this aesthetic that the most famous tea master, Shen Nong, would elevate to a spiritual art form in the 16th century. Rikyu served as tea master to the most powerful military ruler of the age, yet his philosophy was one of radical equality and tranquility within the confines of the tea room. He designed the chashitsu, the purpose-built tea house, to be an escape from the worldly strife outside. The entrance was made deliberately small, a crawl space called the nijirigachi, which forced every guest, regardless of social rank, to bow and enter humbly, leaving their status and swords at the threshold. Inside, the space was meticulously calculated to create harmony. The arrangement of the tatami mats, the placement of a single scroll in the alcove, the choice of a simple flower arrangement, all were intended to focus the mind and create a moment of pure, shared presence. The ceremony itself, chanoyu, became a choreographed meditation. Every movement, from the purification of the utensils to the precise way the tea is whisked and presented, is performed with mindful grace. The goal is not merely to drink tea, but to experience ikai-go ikai, a phrase meaning one time, one meeting. This concept reminds participants that each tea gathering is a unique, unrepeatable event, a fleeting moment of human connection to be treasured. So while the Chinese tea horse trade moved mountains of bricks to secure borders, and the Silk Road caravans braved deserts for profit, Japan turned the leaf inward. They distilled it into a droplet of philosophy, proving that tea's greatest journey could be the few feet from the hearth to the guest, when every step is taken with intention. This refined, insular world, however, was about to be shattered by the arrival of ships from a distant continent, carrying merchants with a very different kind of thirst. A world away from the serene Japanese tea room, the vast deserts of Arabia held secrets of their own. While Europe remained largely oblivious, a quiet question lingers in the historical silence. Could the knowledge of tea have seeped into the West centuries before Portuguese caravels ever rounded the Cape of Good Hope? The evidence is fragmentary, a scattering of clues like leaves at the bottom of an ancient cup. We must look to the great Arab scholars and physicians of the medieval Islamic world, men like al-Razi and Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. These polymaths compiled vast medical encyclopedias, synthesizing knowledge from Greece, Persia, India, and possibly China. Within their texts, there are descriptions of medicinal herbs and infusions that some historians have cautiously suggested might refer to tea. A plant called chai or shai is mentioned in certain contexts for its digestive and stimulant properties, yet the descriptions are often vague, lacking the definitive detail found in Chinese texts. It is entirely possible these references are to other, similar herbs, like mountain tea or infusions of mint. The tantalizing possibility remains that Arab traders, the master navigators of both desert and sea who connected the spice markets of India with the Mediterranean, may have encountered compressed tea bricks in the bazaars of Central Asia. They might have sampled it, traded it in small quantities as a curious medicinal oddity, but it never ignited a widespread cultural shift. For the Arab world, coffee, discovered in Ethiopia and cultivated in Yemen, would become the social and intellectual beverage of choice, leaving tea as a faint, almost ghostly presence in the margins of their text. While the Arabian Trail grows cold, another, colder path was slowly being forged far to the north. This was the Siberian Tea Road, a brutal and protracted overland journey that began in the 17th century. It did not start with grand imperial design, but with the gritty, incremental work of frontier traders and Cossack explorers. After the Russian Empire expanded eastward, establishing a tenuous hold over Siberia, a direct border with China was formed. At remote trading posts like Kayaktur, a frontier town that became legendary, a barter system emerged. Russian merchants offered furs, the incredible soft gold of sable and ermine, in exchange for Chinese goods, primarily silk, porcelain, and those ubiquitous bricks of tea. The journey these bricks then faced was almost unimaginable in its length and hardship. Loaded onto sledges in winter or carts in summer, the cargo traveled over 4,000 miles across the Siberian taiga, a frozen wilderness of forest and swamp. The trip could take a year and a half. The tea bricks, already hardened, proved perfectly suited to survive this epic transit. They became so valued and standardized that in remote Siberian villages, a tea brick itself was often used as currency, broken into pieces to make small purchases. This slow, continental seepage of tea into Russia created a unique cultural tradition, culminating in the samovar, a central urn for boiling water around which family and social life would revolve. Yet this northern route, for all its endurance, was a trickle, not a flood. It served a vast but sparsely populated empire, and the tea remained an expensive luxury for most. The record of this trade is clearer, documented in customs ledgers and travelers' accounts, but it highlights a crucial truth. For tea to truly conquer the West, it needed more than a slow overland crawl or ambiguous mentions in old books. It required the direct, relentless, and ocean-spanning ambition of a new kind of global power, one that would not just accept tea as a curious import, but would demand it on a scale that would reshape the world. The quiet mysteries of early contact only deepen the question: what happened when Europe finally took a deliberate sip? The serenity of the Japanese terroir could not be more distant from the deck of a Portuguese caravel. In the early 1500s, these sturdy ships began nosing their way up the coast of China, seeking not philosophy but profit and converts. At the Portuguese trading enclave in Macau, merchants and Jesuit priests finally encountered the drink the Chinese called cha. Their written accounts, sent back to Lisbon, are among the first definitive European descriptions of tea. They noted it as a medicinal hot beverage, a curious local custom. Yet for nearly a century, the Portuguese made little effort to bring it home in quantity. Their ships were laden with silks, spices, and porcelain, goods with established, booming markets. Tea remained a footnote, a strange foreign practice observed but not yet craved. That craving would be manufactured by a different, far more ruthless commercial enterprise. Enter the Dutch East India Company, the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, or VOC. Chartered in the year 1602, it was not merely a trading company, it was a sovereign power with the authority to wage war, negotiate treaties, and establish colonies. By 1610, the VOC had muscled the Portuguese out of key positions in the East Indies, and their sharp-eyed merchants in Java took a calculated risk. They purchased a small cargo of Japanese green tea and shipped it to Amsterdam. This was not for the common man. The first tea to reach European shores was astonishingly expensive, a luxury so rare it was initially sold in apothecaries by the ounce as a medicinal curiosity for the very rich. The Dutch aristocracy, always eager for new ways to display their global reach and refined taste, seized upon it. They transformed tea drinking into a theatrical social event. Elaborate rituals emerged in wealthy homes, centered on exotic new objects, delicate Chinese porcelain cups and tiny Yixing teapots, all imported at great cost. The proof of tea's elite status is captured in the art of the time. Look at a Dutch Golden Age still life painting from the mid-1600s. Amidst the lavish displays of sliced lemons, peeled nuts, and polished pewter, you will often see a small porcelain teacup, its contents steaming gently. It is placed with deliberate care, a symbol of global connection and immense wealth. The painting itself is a boast, a permanent record of a family's ability to acquire the world's most exclusive novelties. For the Dutch, tea was not yet a daily comfort. It was a trophy, a fragrant, liquid proof of their commercial empire's reach. But no trophy remains exclusive forever, especially when a rival empire, fueled by a different social obsession, decides it must have the prize for itself. The Dutch had turned tea into a luxury trophy, but it was a Portuguese princess who would plant the seed of a national obsession in English soil. Her name was Catherine of Braganza, and when she arrived in London in 1662 to marry King Charles II, her dowry included a small chest of a curious foreign leaf. At the gloomy, damp English court, the young queen from sunnier climes maintained her Portuguese custom of drinking tea, a habit she used to assert her own refined identity. She began hosting elegant tea receptions, transforming the act from a private medicinal sip into the height of fashionable sociability. The ladies and gentlemen of the court, eager to emulate the queen, swiftly adopted the practice. Almost overnight, tea became the drink of the royal and the aristocratic, a symbol of status and modern taste. This royal endorsement was the spark, but the fuel for the coming fire would be provided by a corporation with a charter and a fleet. The British East India Company, watching the Dutch profits with envy, saw its opportunity. In 1669, they imported their first official order of tea, a mere 143 pounds. It was a tentative beginning, but the company had a vision and, crucially, the naval power to pursue it. Their goal was not just to trade for tea, but to control its very source. To understand the immense challenge they faced, we must step into the world of 18th century Canton, known today as Guangzhou. China, under the Tang Dynasty, was a powerhouse that viewed European traders as barbarians from the sea, to be managed with strict control. They established what historians call the Canton system. This was a set of regulations that funneled all Western trade through this single southern port. Foreign ships were not allowed to sail up the Pearl River to Canton itself until they had hired a local Chinese pilot and paid a series of taxes. Once there, they were confined to a small, muddy strip of land along the riverbank called the 13 Factories, a series of combined warehouses and living quarters. The most crucial rule was this: Europeans could not deal directly with Chinese tea growers or even most merchants. All business had to go through a licensed guild of Chinese merchant firms known as the Hong. These Hong merchants, about a dozen in number, were the only authorized intermediaries. They were responsible for the behavior of the foreigners, for collecting imperial taxes, and for supplying the tea. This system placed the Hong merchants in a position of immense power and immense risk. They negotiated prices, arranged for the tea to be packed into specially lined chests for the long sea voyage, and guaranteed its quality. For the British East India Company factors, life in Canton was a cycle of intense seasonal pressure. They would arrive with the monsoon winds, their ships laden with silver bullion, the only thing China initially wanted in exchange for its tea. Then began months of tense haggling with their assigned Hong merchant, inspecting samples, and overseeing the meticulous packing of thousands of chests in the factory warehouses. They lived in cultural isolation, forbidden from learning Chinese or bringing women into the factories, their world limited to the riverfront. Every transaction was a delicate dance of protocol and profit, all under the watchful eye of the Chinese imperial officials. The tea that left Canton on those heavy East Indiamen was more than a commodity. It was a product of a rigid, controlled encounter between two empires that viewed each other with deep suspicion. The British were getting their tea, but the terms were entirely China's, and the cost, measured in vast rivers of silver flowing eastward, was becoming unsustainable. This one-sided trade could not last forever, and the company was already searching for a lever to break the system open. Every chest of tea sailing west from Canton carried a hidden cost, a river of silver flowing relentlessly in the opposite direction. For decades, this was the simple, brutal arithmetic of the trade. Britain and soon all of Europe had developed an insatiable thirst for tea, a demand that grew with every passing year. Yet the Qing Empire, producer of silks, porcelain, and now this bewitching leaf, was a civilization largely self-sufficient. They viewed European woolens as coarse and unsuited to their climate, and their own manufacturing was so advanced that few foreign goods held any appeal. The one thing China would reliably accept in exchange for its treasures was pure silver bullion. So, year after year, British East India Company ships arrived in Canton with their holds filled not with trade goods, but with heavy, gleaming bars of Spanish silver dollars mined from the Americas. They handed this hard currency over to the Hong merchants, loaded their ships with tea, and sailed away. The result was a devastating trade deficit, a hemorrhage of the very metal that formed the bedrock of the British economy. Historians call this the Great Silver Drain. Imagine the anxiety in London's financial districts and the halls of Parliament as they watched the nation's wealth, quite literally, sail to the east and vanish. It was an economic mystery with a terrifyingly simple answer. They were buying a luxury their society now deemed a necessity, and they were running out of money to pay for it. This created a desperate, pressing question for the East India Company and the British government. What commodity, what single product could they sell to China in such vast quantities that it would reverse this flow and bring silver back? They needed something the Chinese would crave as deeply as the British craved tea. The search for this magical balancing item became an obsession. They tried everything. They offered British clocks and scientific instruments, but the Chinese court had its own skilled craftsmen. They pushed Indian cotton, but it could not compete with local textiles. Every attempt failed. The trade imbalance grew wider, the political pressure mounted, and the company's future hung in the balance. In the shadowy warehouses of Canton, a grim and cynical solution began to take shape, one that would turn a story of cultural exchange into a saga of exploitation and tragedy. The stage was set not for a new commodity, but for a poison. The answer to Britain's silver crisis was a flower, but not one of beauty. In the poppy fields of Bengal, which the East India Company now controlled after conquering large parts of India, they found their terrible solution. Opium, the addictive sap of the poppy, was a product China did not produce in quantity, and one for which a market could be artificially created. The company established a vast, state-run monopoly on opium cultivation. Peasant farmers were forced to grow poppies instead of food crops, selling the raw sap at a fixed, low price to company warehouses. There, workers processed it into dense, smokable balls, packed them into chests, and shipped them to the Chinese coast. But there was a critical problem. The Qing Dynasty had banned the import of opium decades earlier, recognizing its dangers, so the company devised a system of plausible deniability. They would not land the opium chests in Canton themselves. Instead, they sold the opium at auction in Calcutta to private British and Indian traders, who then sailed fast, armed clipper ships to the waters off China. These ships, known as receiving ships, would anchor just outside Chinese jurisdiction. There, they would sell their cargo to Chinese smuggling syndicates, who used fleets of small, fast boats called fast crabs or scrambling dragons to run the chests ashore under cover of darkness. The silver the smugglers paid for the opium was then collected by the company's agents and used perfectly legally to purchase tea in Canton. The cycle was complete. British silver stopped flowing out, and Chinese silver began flowing in to pay for the poison. The social cost inside China was catastrophic. What began as a habit among the elite spread like a plague through all levels of society. Port cities like Canton were the epicenter. In the back alleys, dimly lit opium dens proliferated. A user would lie on a wooden bunk, heat a small ball of opium over a lamp, and inhale the vapors through a long pipe. The initial euphoria gave way to addiction, lethargy, and despair. Manual laborers spent their wages on the drug instead of feeding their families. government clerks and even soldiers became addicts, sapping the vitality of the state itself. Silver, the lifeblood of the Qing economy, was now hemorrhaging out to pay for the opium, causing inflation and economic instability. By the 1830s, millions of Chinese were addicted, and the empire was being bled dry both morally and financially. The Qing government, finally recognizing an existential threat, appointed a stern, incorruptible official named Lin Zexu to solve the crisis. His actions would not solve anything, however. They would shatter the uneasy peace of the Canton system and plunge two empires into a war fought over the right to sell a drug, a conflict that would forever alter the fate of tea, China, and the modern world. The poppy fields of Bengal fed a smuggling empire, but the tea they paid for still had to cross 15,000 miles of open ocean. This final, desperate leg of the journey sparked a technological revolution, a breathtaking race against time itself. By the 1850s, the demand for fresh tea, particularly the first delicate harvest of the season, had created a market frenzy in London. That first chest to reach the auction floor each year could fetch a premium of double or triple the normal price, a fortune for the ship that carried it. To capture this prize, naval architects abandoned the slow, sturdy hulls of the old East Indiamen. They drew inspiration from the streamlined Baltimore clippers, American ships built for speed. The result was the ultimate sailing machine, the China tea clipper. These were vessels of breathtaking beauty and purpose. Imagine a hull longer and sharper than any that had come before, slicing through the water like a blade. Their masts towered into the sky, rigged with a cloud of canvas so vast it seemed impossible the slender hull could bear the strain. Ships like the Cutty Sark and the Thermopylae became legends, their names whispered with awe in dockside taverns. Their sole mission was speed. Every spring, as the new tea was packed in Canton, these clippers would load their precious cargo, thousands of chests filling the holds. Then, with a favorable wind, they would cast off for the most dangerous sailing route on Earth, the Great Circle Passage around Cape Horn. This was not a voyage, it was a month-long gauntlet. The ships drove south through the Pacific into the frigid, storm-racked latitude sailors called the Roaring Forties and the Furious Fifties. Here, waves could build to the height of a 5-story building, and winds screamed through the rigging with enough force to tear sails to ribbons or snap a mast. Icebergs lurked in the gloom. The crew, hardened men working for a share of the profits, labored in freezing, soaking conditions, climbing the icy ratlines to reef sails in hurricane-force winds. Rounding Cape Horn itself was the ultimate test, a battle against the will of the sea. The captain who pushed his ship and crew the hardest, who carried more sail for longer, might shave a day off his rival's time, and that single day could mean the difference between glory and ruin in London. The newspapers followed these races as if they were sporting events, publishing breathless updates whenever ships were sighted. In 1866, the most famous tea race of all unfolded between the Ariel and the Teeping. They left the pagoda anchorage in Foochow on the same tide, and for 99 days they raced neck and neck across 3 oceans. They arrived in the English Channel so close together that the Ariel signaled a nearby steamer to tow her up the Thames. The Teeping hired a tug as well. They docked in London within 28 minutes of each other, their tea still fetching that legendary premium. Yet this glorious romantic era was doomed from the start. In 1869, the same year the Cutty Sark was launched, the Suez Canal opened. This artificial waterway in Egypt shortened the journey to China by thousands of miles, but its narrow, windless passages were useless to sailing ships. They belonged to the steamship, which could chug through reliably, towing barges of tea. Almost overnight, the clipper's supreme advantage vanished. The Cutty Sark herself spent only a few years in the tea trade before being forced to carry wool from Australia. The age of wind and canvas, of human skill pitted directly against the elements for a chest of leaves, was over. The steam whistle had sounded its end, but the question of who would grow the tea was about to trigger one last audacious act of theft. The thunder of clipper ships faded, but the question of supply remained a national obsession. Britain still depended entirely on a single, hostile nation for its most vital import, a strategic vulnerability that kept merchants and ministers awake at night. The solution would not come from diplomacy or trade negotiations, but from a quiet, daring act of botanical espionage. In the year 1848, a Scottish botanist and plant hunter named Robert Fortune accepted a secret commission from the British East India Company. His mission was as simple as it was audacious: travel deep into the interior of China, into regions forbidden to foreigners, and steal the very source of the empire's power, the tea plant itself, along with the closely guarded knowledge of how to process its leaves. To succeed, Fortune had to vanish. He shaved his head, acquired a set of fine silk robes, and grew a long queue or ponytail in the Manchu style. With the help of a local servant, he practiced the manners and movements of a wealthy Chinese merchant from a distant province. The disguise was perilously thin. A single misstep or a curious official could mean imprisonment or worse. Venturing beyond the treaty ports, he traveled into the misty hills of Anhui and Fujian, the heartland of China's green tea production. What he discovered there shocked him. The Chinese tea makers, masters of their craft, employed techniques that were deliberately misleading to foreign buyers. To give the dried leaves a pleasing green color and weight, they often added toxic dyes like Prussian blue and gypsum powder. The tea that Europe so cherished was, in many cases, literally poisoned by the process meant to perfect it. Fortune meticulously documented these practices, but his true objective lay in the terraced gardens clinging to the hillsides. His greatest challenge was not just acquiring the plants, but keeping them alive on the months-long sea voyage to India. A decade earlier, a doctor named Nathaniel Ward had made a chance discovery: a fern sprouting in a sealed glass jar he had forgotten on a windowsill. This revealed that plants could create their own miniature, self-sustaining atmosphere inside a sealed glass case. The Wardian case was born, a portable greenhouse. Fortune used these glass boxes, filled with soil and young tea shrubs, to create a tiny, traveling slice of China's ecosystem. He packed them carefully onto a ship bound for Calcutta, each case a silent, leafy stowaway carrying the future of an industry. The journey was brutal, with storms and shifting cargo, but the sealed environment protected the precious seedlings from salt spray and temperature swings. Upon his arrival in India, Fortune's work was only half done. He had the plants, but he needed the people. He managed to smuggle out a group of experienced Chinese tea processors, convincing them to share their centuries of knowledge. In the high, humid hills of Darjeeling and Assam, these experts taught British planters the precise arts of withering, rolling, oxidizing, and firing the leaves. The climate and soil proved unexpectedly ideal. Within a generation, the stolen seeds and smuggled skills had taken root, flourishing into vast, orderly plantations. The Chinese monopoly was broken forever. Robert Fortune, the mild-mannered botanist, had not just stolen a plant, he had transplanted an entire industry, shifting the center of the tea world from the ancient hills of China to the colonial estates of the British Empire. This act of biological theft would bring prosperity to some and unimaginable hardship to others, as a new system of production rose from the stolen seeds. Robert Fortune's smuggled seedlings were not the first tea plants to take root in Indian soil. They were merely the first to be recognized. For centuries, a wild and robust cousin of the Chinese tea plant had been growing unnoticed in the misty jungles of Assam, a remote region in northeastern India. The local Singpho and other indigenous tribes had long known of the plant, brewing its leaves into a strong, pungent drink they called falap. But to the British, it was just another jungle shrub until a series of rumors reached the ears of the East India Company. In the early 1820s, a Scottish adventurer named Robert Bruce was told by a local chieftain of wild tea trees growing in the hills. Bruce managed to secure some samples and seeds, though the full story of his discovery is tangled in conflicting accounts and lost letters. It was his brother, Charles Bruce, who a decade later, while suppressing a rebellion in the region, officially confirmed the existence of vast wild tea forests. He sent leaves and seeds to the botanical gardens in Calcutta for identification. The experts were stunned. This was not the delicate, small-leaved Camellia sinensis of China. This was a distinct variety, Camellia sinensis var. Assamica, a tree that could grow as tall as a house with broad, glossy leaves. Here was a miracle, a native tea supply growing on British-controlled land. The commercial implications were explosive. The company could now bypass China entirely. They launched a frantic rush to clear the jungle and establish order upon the wilderness. The wild forests were razed, and in their place arose geometrically precise plantations, endless rows of pruned bushes stretching to the horizon. This new frontier demanded an immense, cheap, and controllable workforce. The answer was a system of indentured labor, a form of debt bondage that would trap millions. Plantation owners sent recruiters into the poorest regions of central and eastern India, offering advances and promises of good wages. Desperate villagers, often unable to read the contracts they put their thumbprint on, agreed to travel to Assam. The journey itself was a horror, a long trek or crowded riverboat ride where disease ran rampant. Upon arrival, the reality was crushing. Workers and their families were housed in dilapidated, overcrowded lines, rows of barracks with dirt floors. Their contracts bound them to the plantation for 5 years or more. Wages were pitifully low, and the plantation store where they were forced to buy food and supplies kept them in perpetual debt. Overseers, known as sardars, wielded brutal authority. The work was relentless and dangerous, clearing snake-infested land under a blistering sun, plucking leaves for hours on end, and working in the suffocating heat of the fermentation rooms. Disease was constant, with malaria and cholera claiming countless lives. Escape was nearly impossible, with the dense, unfamiliar jungle and armed guards forming a perfect prison. This system, justified by racist ideologies of the time, created the brutal engine that would feed the world's new tea habit. The tea that grew from this suffering was different too. Assamica produced a liquor that was bold, malty, and intensely red, a stark contrast to the delicate green teas of China. It stood up beautifully to the long sea voyage, and crucially, it mixed perfectly with milk and sugar, aligning perfectly with British tastes. Meanwhile, in the cool, high Himalayas, the Chinese varieties fortune had stolen were flourishing in Darjeeling, producing a tea with a unique muscatel flavor, the champagne of teas. By the late 19th century, India was no longer just a consumer of tea, it was the empire's tea factory. Auction houses in London and Calcutta buzzed with brokers selling chests marked Assam and Darjeeling. The global map of tea had been redrawn. China's near-total monopoly was shattered, its economy further weakened, while Britain now controlled both the supply and the demand. The cup of tea, that symbol of British comfort, now rested on two pillars, one built on smuggled knowledge, the other on a wild plant and the backs of indentured laborers. The leaf's journey had entered its most industrialized and perhaps its darkest chapter. Across the Atlantic, the very leaf that fortified an empire was about to become its undoing. In the American colonies, tea had long been a beloved staple, a taste of home and civility. But by the 1770s, it was undergoing a sinister transformation in the public mind, from a comforting beverage into a potent symbol of oppression. The issue was not the tea itself, but the principle wrapped around it. The British Parliament, desperate to pay off debts from the French and Indian War and to prop up the struggling East India Company, passed a series of taxes on the colonies. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, each was met with fierce resistance under the rallying cry of "no taxation without representation." The colonists argued that as British subjects, they could not be taxed by a parliament in which they had no elected voice. When most of these taxes were repealed under pressure, one remained as a pointed assertion of power: the tax on tea. The Tea Act of 1773 was the final spark. It granted the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in America and allowed them to sell directly through their own agents, cutting out colonial merchants. While this actually made the company's tea cheaper, even with the tax, the colonists saw the trap. To accept the taxed tea was to accept Parliament's right to tax them at all. It was a principle they would not swallow. In port cities from New York to Charleston, protest meetings were held and company tea ships were turned away. But in Boston, Royal Governor Thomas Hutchinson was determined to enforce the law. 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Elena, and the Beaver, sat in the harbor, their holds filled with over 300 chests of East India Company tea. The colonists demanded the ships leave, but the governor refused to grant the necessary clearance papers. A deadline was set December 16th. On the cold, clear evening of that day, a massive crowd gathered at the Old South Meeting House. When word came that the governor had again refused to send the ships away, a cry went up. Samuel Adams is said to have declared, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." It was not a signal of defeat but of action. From the meeting house streamed dozens of men, their faces smeared with soot and lampblack, dressed in ragged blankets and wearing feathers in their hair, a crude imitation of Mohawk warriors. This disguise was both practical and deeply symbolic, a way to conceal their identities while visually rejecting the European finery associated with the British court. They moved swiftly to Griffin's Wharf, boarded the 3 vessels, and with a methodical, disciplined fury that lasted for hours, they hoisted chest after chest onto the decks. Using hatchets to split the wooden chests open, they dumped over 92,000 pounds of tea, an enormous fortune, into the dark, salty waters of Boston Harbor. The crowd on the docks watched in silence as the sea was stained brown with the leaves of rebellion. This was not a riot, it was a deliberate political statement. They harmed no one, damaged only the tea, and even replaced a broken padlock. The Boston Tea Party was a masterstroke of protest, but its consequences were immediate and severe. An outraged Parliament passed a series of punitive laws the colonists called the Intolerable Acts, closing Boston's port and stripping Massachusetts of self-government. Instead of isolating one rebellious city, these acts united the colonies in common cause. Within 2 years, the first shots of the American Revolutionary War would be fired at Lexington and Concord. A war for independence had begun, ignited not by a musket ball, but by a chest of tea tossed into the harbor. The commodity that built empires in the East had now helped dismantle one in the West, proving that the value of a leaf could be measured not just in silver, but in liberty. While the Atlantic seethed with rebellion, a far colder and more patient journey was unfolding across the roof of the world. The Russian caravan was not a single train of camels, but a relentless, seasonal relay that stretched over 11,000 miles, an overland epic that could take a year or more to complete. It began in the tea mountains of China, where bricks were packed with immense care into the panniers of 2 humped Bactrian camels, creatures uniquely built for the punishing trek ahead. These caravans, sometimes numbering in the hundreds of animals, would lumber north into the Gobi Desert, then across the vast, wind-swept steppes of Mongolia. The journey did not stop for winter, it transformed. Upon reaching the frozen rivers and snowbound trails of Siberia, the precious cargo was transferred from camelback onto heavy wooden sledges, pulled by teams of hardy horses through a world locked in silent, sub-zero whiteness. This constant exposure to the elements night after night left an indelible mark on the tea itself. To survive the brutal cold, the caravan drivers huddled around campfires, their tents and the tea bricks stored nearby. The smoke from countless pine and birch fires would slowly seep into the tightly packed leaves, imparting a distinctive, subtle smokiness to the brew. This was not a flaw, but a signature, the taste of the journey itself preserved in every cup. The entire system pivoted around a single, crucial gateway, the remote border town of Kayakta. Founded as a fortress in the early 1700s, Kayaktu became the sole legal point of exchange between the Russian and Qing empires for over a century. On one side stood a Russian settlement, on the other a Chinese trading compound called Meimeicheng, meaning trade town. Here, under the watchful eyes of both empires' officials, the monumental barter took place. Russian merchants offered furs, leather, and woolen cloth. In return, they received silk, porcelain, and chest upon chest of tea. Controlling this bottleneck required immense capital and political favor, a domain ruled by powerful dynasties like the Stroganovs. Already legendary for their exploration and salt mining ventures, these merchant titans financed caravans, navigated imperial bureaucracy, and ultimately helped define Russian aristocratic taste. And how did one properly enjoy this hard-won, smoky treasure? The answer bubbled in the heart of every home, from the humblest izba to the grandest palace, the samovar. More than a kettle, this ornate central urn was a symbol of hospitality and community. Water kept hot over a charcoal fire would be used to brew a potent concentrate called zavaka in a small teapot perched on top. Each person would pour a little of this strong tea into their cup, then dilute it to their liking with hot water from the samovar's spigot, often sweetening it with jam or sugar held between the teeth. The ritual, born from an epic journey across continents, turned a simple drink into a slow, shared ceremony, a tiny hearth of warmth against the long memory of the Siberian winter. The smoky warmth of the Russian samovar was a world away from the high, thin air of the Tibetan plateau, where tea underwent its most radical and vital transformation. Here, the durable brick tea was not merely steeped, it was dismantled and rebuilt into something entirely new, a culinary lifeline called po cha or butter tea. The process begins with a block of dark, fermented tea, often from the Pemagol region. A piece is broken off, crushed, and boiled for hours in water, sometimes with a pinch of soda ash, until it produces a deeply concentrated, almost black liquor. This potent brew is then strained into a tall, cylindrical churn called a dongmo. Now comes the essential fusion. A generous lump of yak butter, rich and slightly tangy from the high-altitude pastures, is added along with a measure of salt. The churner plunges a wooden piston into the mixture, pumping it vigorously until the hot tea, fat, and salt emulsify into a smooth, creamy, frothy soup. The result is not a delicate beverage, but a hearty, savory meal in a bowl, with a distinctive oily sheen and a flavor that can surprise the uninitiated. This was not a recipe born from culinary whimsy, but from stark biological necessity. At altitudes where the air holds little oxygen and winter temperatures plunge far below freezing, the human body burns calories at an extraordinary rate. The traditional Tibetan diet of tsampa, roasted barley flour, and dairy products provides dense energy, but it is difficult to digest. Butter tea is the perfect mediator. The tea aids digestion and provides stimulants and vitamins, while the yak butter delivers a massive caloric punch and essential fats to insulate against the cold. The salt helps retain fluids and combat dehydration in the dry mountain air. To refuse a bowl is not just impolite, it is unwise, a rejection of the very fuel needed to survive. Beyond survival, po cha is the rhythm of Tibetan social life. A host's first act for any guest is to prepare and serve a bowl. It is offered continuously throughout a visit, with the guest taking only a sip each time before the host replenishes it, a silent dance of generosity that only ends when the guest literally covers their cup with a hand. During festivals and religious ceremonies, vast cauldrons of butter tea are prepared for monks and communities. It is a libation for deities, an offering to the departed, and the glue that binds gatherings. The tea brick, once a unit of trade in a distant Chinese market, thus became the heartbeat of a culture. It ceased to be an external commodity and was woven into the very fabric of Tibetan identity, a warm, salty, life-sustaining thread connecting the practical to the spiritual in every frothy sip. A single type of clay, found only in the hills around Yixing in Jiangsu province, holds a secret that transforms a simple pot into a living vessel. This is Xisha purple clay, a material unlike any other ceramic on Earth. Its magic lies in a unique double-porous structure, a microscopic landscape of tiny cavities. When you brew tea in a Yixing pot, something extraordinary happens. The hot liquid does not just steep the leaves, it interacts with the very walls of the pot. The porous clay gently absorbs the tea's essential oils and flavors during each use. Over time, after dozens, then hundreds of infusions dedicated to a single type of tea, the pot itself becomes seasoned. It builds up a rich, invisible patina of taste memory. A pot used only for oolong will begin to enhance the floral notes of any oolong brewed in it. One devoted to aged pu'er will deepen the earthy complexity of that tea. This is why collectors never wash a Yixing pot with soap, only rinse it with hot water, and why they dedicate each pot to one tea variety for life. The pot becomes a partner in the ritual, its value measured not in its decoration, but in the silent history steeped into its walls. The artistry of these pots is deceptively simple. They are almost never glazed, showcasing the natural, earthy tones of the clay itself, which can range from a deep burgundy to a pale buff yellow. Master potters, whose skills are passed down through generations, shape them by hand on a slow-turning wheel, using techniques unchanged for centuries. The goal is not ornate beauty but perfect functionality. The spout is designed to pour cleanly and quickly without dripping. The handle balances comfortably in the hand. The lid fits with a snug, almost airtight click. A well-made Yixing pot is a masterpiece of ergonomics and quiet elegance. This combination of mystical material and sublime craftsmanship created an object of intense desire. For centuries, Chinese scholars and emperors collected these pots, viewing them as the ultimate expression of tea culture, more valuable than gold or jade. The most famous pots from the Ming and Qing dynasties now sit in museums or private vaults, fetching prices comparable to fine paintings. The obsession continues today, with modern masters signing their works and collectors scrutinizing the density of the clay and the purity of the form. In a world of mass-produced ceramics, the Yixing pot remains a testament to a profound idea that the truest luxury is not about outward show, but about a deep, patient relationship between object, element, and time. The silent wisdom of a Yixing pot is echoed by something far older and far wilder. Deep within the cloud forests of Yunnan in southwestern China, the story of tea does not live in libraries or museums, but grows literally into the sky. Here, hidden from the world for centuries, stand the ancient tea forests. These are not the orderly, pruned rows of a plantation, but towering, gnarled giants, some over 1,000 years old, their roots tangled with a living ecosystem of ferns, moss, and orchids. For the local indigenous communities like the Bulang and Dai people, these trees have always been sacred ancestors, sources of medicine and livelihood, tended with a gentle, symbiotic care that forbids pesticides or forced cultivation. They represent a living library of genetic diversity, a stark contrast to the handful of commercial cultivars that dominate the global market today. Within this genetic vault are flavors and traits long forgotten by the wider world, the lost varieties of tea's deep past. Modern archaeology and botany have turned their focus to these forests, not with the intent to conquer, but to listen. Scientists working alongside local communities have identified wild tea trees with verified ages of over 3,200 years. To stand before one of these patriarchs is to be in the presence of an organism that was already ancient when the Silk Road was just a footpath. These trees are not simply old, they are the original source, the untamed progenitors from which all cultivated tea is descended. Their discovery forces us to rewrite the map of tea's origin, placing its heart firmly in these misty mountains. But how do we trace the journey from these wild giants to the bush in your garden? The answers are now being written in a language far older than any historical text, the language of DNA. Modern genetic analysis allows scientists to extract and sequence the plant's code, creating a family tree for Camellia sinensis. By comparing the DNA of wild Yunnan trees with cultivated varieties from China, India, Japan, and beyond, researchers can solve long-standing mysteries. They can track the precise routes of its domestication, confirming which paths were taken by human hands and which were natural migrations. They can identify the genetic markers for resilience to drought or unique flavor compounds, traits that may have been lost as farmers selected only for yield and convenience. This genetic detective work is revealing that many prized modern teas are genetic bottlenecks, descendants of just a few cloned plants, making the entire global crop vulnerable to disease. The rediscovery of these ancient forests, therefore, is not a nostalgic exercise. It is a vital rescue mission for the future of tea itself. Within the immense genetic diversity of those wild trees may lie the natural resistance to a blight that hasn't even emerged yet, or the blueprint for a flavor that could define the next century of tea culture. Each leaf from a 3,000-year-old tree is a message in a bottle, carrying secrets from tea's primordial past, waiting for us to learn how to read them. Buried in the cool, dark cellars of collectors, a tea is quietly breathing. This is pure, a living commodity from the ancient tea forests of Yunnan that defies our usual understanding of what tea can be. Unlike green tea, which is prized for its freshness and consumed within the year, pure is deliberately crafted to age, to transform, and to gain value with the passage of time. Its story is a direct thread back to the very origins of trade on the tea horse road. To survive the long, arduous journey to Tibet, tea from Yunnan's wild trees was steamed, compressed with immense force into dense cakes, bricks, or even mushroom-shaped chuocha, and then wrapped in dry bamboo husks. This process did more than just make it portable. It created a stable environment for a slow, microbial fermentation to begin. The compression limited oxidation, allowing beneficial bacteria and yeasts to work on the leaves over years and decades, mellowing harsh flavors and developing profound depth. In those dark, tightly packed cakes, the journey was not ending. It was just entering a new, slower phase. Today, this tradition has ignited a global phenomenon that blends connoisseurship with high finance. A well-stored cake of vintage pure, particularly from revered mountains like Bingdao or Lao Banjiang, can fetch prices comparable to a luxury car or a rare bottle of wine. The most sought-after examples are not just drunk, they are traded, collected, and speculated upon in dedicated auction houses and online markets. Authenticity is everything, and each cake tells a story. The specific year of production, the factory or producer who made it, the type of leaf used, and most critically, its storage conditions, whether in the dry air of Kunming or the humid warmth of Hong Kong, all leave an indelible mark on its flavor and its price. This has created a modern mystery, a world where expertise is paramount. How can you tell a genuine, aged cake from a clever forgery? Collectors examine the paper wrapper for accurate printing techniques, study the pattern of tea leaves visible on the surface of the cake, and most importantly, taste the brew itself, searching for the complex, earthy, sometimes fruity or medicinal notes that only genuine age can impart. In this sense, a pure cake has come full circle. Once a durable form of currency bartered for horses on a mountain pass, it is now a liquid asset traded on global markets. It is both a deeply personal sensory experience and a financial instrument, a rare object that you can actually consume as part of its appreciation. The leaf, having traveled through history as medicine, money, and art, now exists in a state of suspended animation, a drinkable archive whose value is measured not in silver but in time itself. A living pure cake and a weathered yixing pot both speak of time, but the leaf's ultimate legacy is written in the rituals of the people who welcomed it. In homes and temples across the globe, the simple act of preparing tea was transformed into a mirror of culture itself. In Japan, the discipline of Chanoyu reached its zenith. More than a ceremony, it is a choreographed philosophy of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Every element, from the raked sand in the garden to the deliberate choice of a single, imperfect ceramic bowl, is intended to cultivate a state of mindful presence. The terum becomes a sanctuary where social rank is left at the low, crawling entrance, and for a few precious moments, all participants are equal in the shared experience of a single, perfect bowl of matcha. This is an aesthetic of profound restraint, where the value lies not in the leaf's rarity, but in the quality of attention paid to it. Meanwhile, in China, the Gongfu tea ceremony celebrates a different kind of mastery. Gongfu means skill achieved through time and practice, and the ritual is a dynamic, almost intimate performance of precision. Using a small yixing pot and tiny aroma cups, the host performs multiple, rapid infusions of a single batch of leaves, often a dark oolong or pure. Each brief steep is poured for the guests in sequence, allowing them to observe how the tea's color, aroma, and flavor evolve from infusion to infusion, from light and floral to deep and resonant. It is a shared sensory exploration, a conversation conducted through the language of taste, honoring the complexity that can be drawn from a single handful of leaves. Across the world, in Britain, tea ritual took a decidedly social form. The invention of afternoon tea in the 1840s, popularly credited to Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, was born from a practical need, a light meal to bridge the long gap between lunch and a late dinner. Yet it quickly crystallized into a powerful social institution. Served on fine china in drawing rooms with its tiered stands of sandwiches, scones, and pastries, afternoon tea became a theater of etiquette and refinement. It was a space for conversation, for displaying domestic order, and for reinforcing social codes. The ritual was less about the tea itself and more about the civilized world it represented, a daily reaffirmation of order and gentility in an industrializing age. In the cold expanse of Russia, the ritual centered on the samovar, a symbol of warmth and communal endurance. The preparation of zavaka, that strong tea concentrate, and its dilution to each drinker's taste created a flexible, generous ritual. Guests would sip from glasses held in ornate metal holders, sweetening their tea with jam or sugar cubes clenched between their teeth. The samovar, constantly steaming at the center of the home, meant hospitality was always on offer, a promise of warmth and conversation against the long winter outside. It spoke of resilience and open-handed welcome. Finally, in the vibrant markets of Morocco, tea ceremony is an art of exuberant hospitality and sweetened refreshment. The preparation of mint tea or atay is a public performance. Green tea, usually gunpowder variety, is rinsed, then steeped with a large bunch of fresh spearmint and an abundance of sugar in a curved silver teapot. The host pours from a height, creating a frothy head in the small, ornate glasses, and then tastes the brew to ensure perfection before serving guests. The high pour aerates the tea, making it refreshing in the desert heat, while the act of pouring itself, done 3 times with the saying that each glass represents a different aspect of life, is a gesture of generosity and respect. From the Zen silence of Japan to the bustling souks of Marrakech, each ceremony tells a story. They reveal what each culture chose to celebrate: restraint or skill, social order or warm hospitality, spiritual mindfulness or sweet, lively connection. The traded leaf did more than cross borders. It became a blank canvas upon which civilizations painted their deepest values, one careful, deliberate pour at a time. These rituals we cherish are built upon a foundation of shadows. For all we know of tea's epic journey, its history remains threaded with profound and tantalizing mysteries, gaps in the story where the map simply ends. Consider the very beginning. While the wild tea forests of Yunnan are now accepted as the cradle, the precise location and timeline of its first domestication is a fierce debate among botanists and historians. Was it a single moment of discovery in one valley, or did multiple communities from Assam to Sichuan independently begin cultivating their own local wild varieties? The genetic and archaeological record is still being written leaf by ancient leaf. Then there are the lost roads. We speak of the Silk Road and the Tea Horse Road as grand, defined highways, but these were merely the main arteries. What of the older, fainter footpaths that preceded them, the trails used by nomadic tribes and local traders to move tea across mountain ranges long before empires organized the trade? These routes have vanished into the landscape, their stories carried away by the same winds that once guided the caravans. What secrets do those forgotten passes hold, and what early forms of trade barter left no written record at all? Equally elusive is the true scale of tea's reach before European ships ever appeared. The hints are there in the ambiguous writings of Arab physicians and the silent evidence of artifacts found far from China. Could tea have reached the courts of ancient Rome or the markets of medieval Constantinople as a rare medicinal curiosity, its identity lost in translation over thousands of miles? Without a clear description or a surviving sample, these possibilities remain ghosts in the historical record, whispers we cannot quite confirm. And what of the lost arts themselves? We know from figures like Robert Fortune that Chinese tea masters employed techniques kept secret for generations. How many other methods of processing, curing, or brewing have vanished entirely? Perhaps there were regional varieties, flavors, and preparations that disappeared when a village was abandoned or a master died without an heir. The tea we drink today is but a fraction of the diversity that once existed, a library where most of the books are forever missing. So we are left with questions that hang in the steam of a freshly poured cup. What other clues are waiting, pressed between the pages of an undiscovered monastic manuscript, or buried in the tomb of a nobleman from a culture we have yet to fully understand? Could a new archaeological dig in a Central Asian oasis town uncover a sealed ceramic jar, preserving within it the tangible taste of a 2,000-year-old tea? The story is not finished. Every sip is a connection to a past that is still revealing itself, a reminder that some of the best secrets are those the earth has yet to surrender. From a medicinal herb sipped by a mythical emperor to a solid brick traded for warhorses, tea has traveled a path longer and more winding than any caravan route. It was a form of currency on the Tibetan plateau, a smuggled secret in a botanist's suitcase, and a poisoned cargo dumped into a harbor in defiance of tyranny. This simple leaf sparked revolutions in America, funded empires through opium's grim trade, and inspired breathtaking races across stormy seas. It became the center of spiritual ceremonies in Japan, the heart of social order in Britain, and a lifeline of calories in the high Himalayas. Tea was never just a drink, it was a catalyst, a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires, moving on the backs of camels, in the holds of clipper ships, and through the hands of countless people whose names history has forgotten. It connected worlds for better and for worse, weaving a delicate web of human endeavor across deserts, mountains, and oceans. So the next time you cradle a warm cup in your hands, take a moment before that first sip. Consider the epic journey contained within those humble leaves, a journey of thousands of years, steeped in mystery, adventure, and profound human connection. We would love to hear what tea means to you. Share your own favorite tea story, ritual, or tradition in the comments below. Your story is now part of this grand, ongoing history.